If you appreciate your public waters and public lands, you're going to love today's episode. If you love steelhead fishing and want to assure that the species persists for many years to come, today is going to be an amazing episode. And if you want to learn from a steelhead fanatic who fishes one of the most iconic steelhead rivers in the world, today is your episode. This is the Wet Fly Swing Podcast, where I show you the best places to travel to for fly fishing, how to find the best resources and tools to prepare for that big trip, and what you can do to give back to the fish species we all love. Hey, I'm Dave, host of the Wet Fly Swing Podcast. I've been fly fishing since I was a little kid. I grew up around a fly shop and have created one of the largest fly fishing podcasts in this country. I've also interviewed more of the greatest fly anglers, tyers, and conservationists than just about anyone out there. Josh Mills, at Mills Fly on Instagram, a BHA team guru, Wild Steelhead board member, and a steelhead fly tyer, is going to take us into the Clearwater River and associated waters around the area. You're going to find out today how to dump your fly reel for a little more stealth. You're going to find out, get a status update on the lower 4 Snake River dams. We're going to find out what's going on with those, and you're also going to find out what a public lands yard sale is all about. Plus, we're going to break down a large western stream so you have better success on the water this year. We're going deep into steelhead and conservation, and let's get an update on the status right now. Here we go. Josh Mills, at Mills Fly on Instagram. How you doing, Josh?
Great, man. Happy to be here.
Thanks for putting some time together to put this one together. I've heard your name quite a bit over the years, and I think I was talking to Nick at Lamps, and I think we chatted recently, and he was probably the last person that we were chatting about you a little bit. I know he's been getting into steelhead, but yeah, how are things going? I know steelhead is that's a big focus for you, but what's keeping you busy lately?
Mostly kids, and my second job is an unpaid Uber driver, taking children to activities and things like that. But I don't know. I've got 2 boys, married, the whole band, live here in Spokane, and nothing to really complain about. But I'm pretty focused on most things fly fishing. But as soon as steelhead around my neck of the woods, I get pretty wanderlusty to head towards Lewiston, Idaho, and the rivers that come in down there for sure.
Yeah, today I want to talk about, you've got quite a bit going on, and that's, I think, going to be one of the challenges today, because we got steelhead to talk about, we got fly tying, the Wild Steelhead Coalition, Backcountry Hunters and Anglers. It seems like you got a lot going. How does it feel for you? Do you feel like you're overwhelmed, or you got about the right amount of stuff going on?
Oh, I think you can feel a bit overwhelmed at times, but I think I can always find a little bit of capacity for the things I love, whether it's my family or my kids or my wife, or the extracurricular activities like Wild Steelhead Coalition, or my day job for Backcountry Hunters and Anglers, or seeking a way to do a little hunting or a little fishing when time allows. But yeah, I keep it pretty busy because my wife always, and she laughs at me because she's like, if there's a Saturday and you're sitting at home and there's nothing going on, I don't do very well with just sitting around. I do not re-energize through sitting on the couch. I re-energize through being outside. I
want to hear about how BHA and how that came to be. Steelhead's always on. A lot of listeners, and myself included, are always interested in steelhead. It's kind of interesting because there's been lots of ups and downs. When you think about where we're at now, 2024, looking at 2025, what's your take on steelhead fishing wise? Where would you be fishing if you could go anywhere for steelhead? What are your top few destinations?
Destination wise, I think I'm very lucky that, I get a chance to fish the rivers like the Clearwater, the Grand Ronde, the Snake, and a couple of times the Salmon. It's a little farther away from me, but, in terms of bucket list stuff, I got a chance to go fish the Skeena region in 2012, and I'm always itching to get back. I'm going to try to get back up there next in 2025. That'll be 13 years since I had fished up there last. But there's always other places. There's always a little bit of wanderlust in any real steelhead angler. I think they always want to try the things that they haven't tried. And, I've heard a lot of stories about those Northern California rivers, whether it be the Smith or the Russian or other places like that, where some of that history really resounds that I've read my books, your Bill Shadds, your Russell Chathams, your the people who are foundational in steelhead lore. And so, those are high on the list. It's just a matter of time before I get down there. Right now, my wife and I are raising 2 boys, 11 and 13, and heavily involved with sports and all the other stuff like that. But before I know it, we'll have a little more time on our hands when the boys get towards college and stuff like that. But man, I count it a blessing that living in Spokane, that I can do bomb down day trips down to Lewis and Clarkson Valley and fill my bucket and make myself temper down the fire just a little bit.
Right.
Yes. But yeah, definitely.
That's it. Yeah, we just came through there on our way back from Wisconsin, drove back through
nice.
there. And yeah, we stopped in Coeur d'Alene and then Spokane. It is pretty cool because you're right there, Montana.
Yeah.
It feels like you're kind of, is that how it feels to you? Does it feel like you have the best of both worlds, steelhead and the trout fishing?
Yeah. I mean, here in Spokane, we have a nice urban river with the Spokane. I mean, I fished it a ton. I grew up learning how to fly fish was centered on the rivers like the Coeur d'Alene or the North Fork of the Clearwater or the St. Joe. And those are all day trips for us. We used to run over to the Clark Fork, still do quite a bit. And then you can get into your other waters, as you progress east into Montana. We've got Washington's a weird state where it's like one part of the day you can be in upland steppe habitat hunting pheasants or upland birds. You can be in a rainforest by the end of the day, swinging flies for steelhead or salmon. You can, from my house, there's a couple dozen places to go skiing. There is all the different things that you want from an outdoors perspective. I mean, Spokane's got its issues just like any other major metro area. But I mean, I have a lot of variability in what we can do from one day's travel here in Spokane. Like, some of my best bird hunting stuff is 40 minutes from my house and 2 hours to steelhead, and and then other fisheries like it's an emerging fishery that a lot of people know about, the Upper Columbia, way up near the border. So there's a wild amount of options to different places for sure.
Yeah, that's nice. And does steelhead still fill a lot of time throughout the year for you?
As much as I can, from our calendar progression, because most of these fish that I'm going for are, Columbia snake origin fish, and, their destinations are, anywhere from, down in the lower end of the river, down to your white salmons, your hood rivers, your klickitats, and your Deschutes. You're starting to see those in June and July. And then, for me, I kind of like religiously watch the dam counts, because I want to see when it's like, it's just one notch above crazy before I start to go fishing, before I start to head to Lewiston. And I think the earliest I've ever caught a steelhead is July 7th in Lewiston. And then you can fish this run for a long time, because these fish, especially as you come into all the rivers that are beyond Lower Granite Dam, we have different waves of fish coming in depending on where they're headed. And I used to, before I knew better, I would fish into March. But now I pretty much end it at the middle of January, and then I let them go do their natural born job, if you will, and to propagate the species. So, basically from end of July through January, I'm pretty focused on steelhead. It's pretty hard for me to pull off and go trout fishing or whatever. That's the kind of thing. If I only have a couple hours, then yeah, I'll run down to the Spokane River, or I'll go to different places. But if I've got a day, I'm going to run down to Lewiston and farm out from there, depending on what system is doing better or what kind of style of fishing I'm more interested in.
Right. That makes sense. How are the dam counts looking so far this year?
So this year, this would be what I would classify as a much better year. It's still not a great year. We have lived the last 10 years, I think, have been pretty horrible. I mean, next to apocalyptic. One year I didn't even fish, and in 2021 didn't steelhead fish, and that was pretty bad. Didn't know what to do with myself, and it felt like, kind of like almost a death knell in some respects. So in perspective, the highest I've ever seen it over Bonneville was just over 600,000 fish. Well, that is way more than normal. All the stars aligned everywhere, and they had a giant return.
What year was that?
That was 2009. And then, the subsequent years up to about 2015 were all pretty incredible in the 250 to 300 to 400,000 range. That might be the top end, but I will not consider a run on the Columbia Snake River system to be good unless it's over 200,000 fish. Do I think it's a lot better this year? You better believe it. We'll probably end up somewhere in the 180,000 range that have crossed over Bonneville. I think between 50 and 60% of those will end up going over Lower Granite Dam to, the fisheries of like the Clearwater, Snake, Imnaha, Wanaha, and other creeks and stuff like that, but whether it be a Soden Creek or Potlatch or different places like that. So the Snake Basin is, kind of where the majority of the fish head to, and thankfully I can fish for them. But last year, I think the run was about 113,000 fish. The prior year was about 123,000 fish. And so we have to remind ourselves that we still have a little bit of ways to go to, for a little bit of stability and, get some good in-river conditions for a couple of years, get some good out-migration conditions, and then hopefully the ocean continues to help us out because we've got issues in the ocean that are pretty tough to control.
Right on. Yeah, that's a good perspective on where we're at. So 600K. And I remember that 2009, I think, is that about the time you started picking up the spey rod?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I had, I started fly fishing when I was about 19. And so when I was, I think it was 2004 or 2005, I caught my first steelhead on a, nymphing jig setup kind of situation. And I'm just like, this is the most amazing thing I've ever done. I want to do this all the time. And then I kept seeing these guys and gals out there with these long rods and, and I'm going, what the hell is that? And I didn't, I just didn't know what I didn't know. And then I went with some buddies that, had gotten into it. And I was like, this looks extremely complicated. And I'm a clumsy 6'8" dude. So I'm like, I don't know how this is going to work out, but we'll do our best. Took a lesson from Tom Larimer through the Silver Bow Fly Shop in 2009 and just happened to be ready to go on the biggest wall of steelhead that I have ever seen. And, within the last 50 years, probably in the top 2 or 3 years. And it just lit me up more than anything. When you get that first tightline grab, I was like, this forever. This is exactly what I want to do. This is exactly, and it just took hold of me like no other outdoor pursuit ever had. And so, it learned our way through some great years and learned a lot of humble pie from 2017, 18, 19 up into the last couple of years, at its worst. In 2021, I think we had 69,000 fish over the dam, which is just nothing. It's just absolutely nothing. And so it has been a blessing to see run counts much higher this year, for sure.
That's right. And you mentioned the Clearwater, Grand Ronde snake. Do you fish those equally throughout the year, or do you have times where you're hitting those in different, flows and levels and things like that?
Yeah, definitely. The Clearwater for me is always in play because you have the one time that a dam is helpful is in the North Fork of the Clearwater. It is where the Dorshak Dam and Dorshak Reservoir is, so it dumps really cold water into the system. It's a drop release dam, comes out of the bottom of the column, so there's times in August where it'll be 100 degrees and you're fishing in waders because the water is 52 degrees. And it's just a weird dichotomy for where your body doesn't know what's going on. And so typically my kind of program is that I focus in on the Clearwater, August, September, through about now. And then what happens is because a lot of out of basin fish will come into the Clearwater and really hunt down that really, really cold water. And so you'll get snake, Grand Ronde, Amnaha, other fish, and Middle Fork of salmon fish coming into the lower Clearwater because the snake is running 70, 68, 70, 72. And so they'll come up and use a little bit of thermal refuge for a while. And so fishing gets, and the Clearwater is never a river where you really can ever really figure it. It's such a challenging river, very rewarding river, but like, my God, is it sometimes tough. And then, when the thermal block breaks on the Clearwater, and a lot of fish will return back towards the snake and then start running towards the Ronde and other rivers. And so spent a lot of time on the Grand Ronde system from there on out for sure.
Yeah, and then the Grand Ronde. And that sounds like a little bit like the Deschutes in the Columbia where fish coming up, it's probably Clearwater fish or whatever, all those fish turn into Deschutes, the cold water for a bit because the Columbia's warm. It sounds like the same thing with the snake. They're doing the same thing up there.
Yeah, very much so. And I think, those are highly important for those migratory fish. Are places like Drano, or places like the Klickitat, or places like the Deschutes where they can peek in and take a breath, if you will. Because, there are certain times where if you looked at we subscribe at the Wild Steelhead Coalition to, this lady puts this report together called the Hot Water Report. And, you're seeing a lot of temperatures in July and August in the upper 60s and low 70s, which are sublethal for many salmonids. It's pretty rough on the sockeye, which have less regulation and ability to handle high temperatures. steelhead are a little bit higher. And of course, this is all anecdotal. I'm no scientist, but those cold water refuges are highly important in the face of climate change and stagnant water through, some of the dams, like the lower four Snake River dams.
Unleash your fly fishing potential with Togen's Fly Shop. Discover their premium products, including fly tying materials, hooks, and a wide range of tying and fishing gear trusted by anglers since 2005. Shop now and make this year your best with their expert tutorials and top quality gear. Visit togensflyshop.com right now. You can support a great shop and this podcast by checking out Togens right now. Dreaming of battling a giant rainbow trout in Alaska's untouched rivers? Turn that dream into a reality with Fishhound Expeditions. Immerse yourself in the heart of Alaska, where epic landscapes and legendary fish await. Visit fishhoundexpeditions.com and mention this podcast to begin your adventure. Fishhound Expeditions, your gateway to the ultimate Alaskan fishing experience. Well, I want to talk about those lower Snake River dams, but I do want to talk a little tips and tricks and stuff like that too. And I know you tie flies, and you were just saying before we got on air that you're sending some flies out to some Deschutes folks. I'm going to be hitting the Deschutes next week. What would you be giving me if you had a few patterns for steelhead in, kind of October on the Deschutes?
I know it sounds very kind of like a dumb answer, but it's like whatever you feel. Like it's so much of what I love about steelhead fishing is the unknown, and the why and the how they're going to eat something is such a mystery. Even after all these times I put flies through the water, and I think I've got these beautiful flies that and half the time I'm convinced if you put a cigarette butt in front of a steelhead, it's going to eat it because a couple of different factors, meaning 1, aggression, 2, latent predatory response, and 3, I think they're very curious animals or fish that don't have hands, and they want to know what the hell's floating past them. And I think sometimes they put things in their mouth and they go, "Ha!" and then you're attached to a rocket at that point.
Right.
But I think one of the things is that I kind of stand on the shoulders of people who got me there, and are people like Mike Davidchak, Brian Chou, Matt Clara, Nick English, all these different people that, kind of brought me along, Rick Matney and Andy Simon, other people out there that like really kind of clued me into a lot of factors that are kind of like on the low, if you will, you know what I mean? And one of those things that I'll say is that you'd be surprised on how sparse you can make things and a fish will actually eat. And I have to continually fight at the vice to not overly dress my flies. And if you remember if the classic movie River Runs Through It, and my good buddy Matt, who lives in Helena now, who's kind of one of my mentors in terms of the vice, that scene from River Runs Through where the kid comes down the stairs, hands the reverend, his father, his homework, and he puts the red line through it and says, "Now again, half the words," or whatever the
right.
paraphrasing. And my buddy Matt's always like, "Now do it again with half the materials." And you go and you learn a lot about construction and stuff like that. But so much of it is proportion and leaning on stuff from prior generations. But whatever you're confident in, I think something happens within you and transfers down the rod through your line into the fly, whether you're fishing it better, whether you're more attentive, whether you're more in tune with your cast to turn the fly over to present it properly through the bucket. I think those are all the things that kind of come through with that. But I'm always faced with the question like, "Hey, what's the best fly?" And I'm like, man, they'll eat Berkeley pink worms and they're going to eat full dress Atlantic salmon. So somewhere in salmon flies. So somewhere in between there is whatever you're happy with.
Right. What would be one you would be using? What's the one that you always got in your back pocket?
Yeah. Also, the same guy, Matt, is always laughing at me because I don't do a very good job of following patterns very often.
Okay.
Like let's say it's the signal light or it's the Brazilian or it's whatever, or the green ant or whatever. But I'm always just screwing around with materials and stuff. But man, there's nothing better than a good solid grab on a muddler. I think that's pretty amazing. And anything you can fish in that top of the water column, I think it's, or just some little subtle comeback flies that I have that I'm just like, how in the hell do they even see this kind of stuff? It's pure magic to me in the fact that you can play this game and get them to, attach themselves to some it doesn't look like a bug. You're like, well, what the hell is it? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So it's like the innate curiosity of these fish, I think, are their undoing from time to time.
Right. Your comeback fly, what would be one that this is after a fish has kind of maybe hit it or tipped it and you come back with something else?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. So, usually it's something like a spade, something very drab, something much smaller, typically black, is where I'm going to roll with. Every once in a while, if it's big, I don't seem to ever size up. I always seem to end up sizing down and usually darker.
Yeah. How small do you go on flies? I know we tend sometimes to use like 8s and stuff like that. How small do you go on your stuff?
Probably 10. I think size 10. I've got a few size 10s. And then you look at the guys that are big Atlantic salmon stuff, and you're like, that's big for them. You're like,
right.
They're catching them on 12s and 14s. And you're like, I don't even understand that,
Right.
I was talking to some guys from Nova Scotia, and they're like, yeah, we use a lot of 14s. I was just blown away, because they're catching fish that are, 15, 20 pounds. And you're like, this just doesn't compute. But, I fish a lot of, 3, 5s, and 7s, occasionally 1s. And then, as the temperature drops and we're switching to sink tips and stuff, I'm, mostly the majority of the flies that I prefer to fish are based on tubes because there's just so much variability to them, and you can go with that. But nothing giant, that's for sure, because most of the time I'm fishing to summer run fish they're pretty grabby.
Yeah, that's the thing. And there's a lot of overlap. We've done a number of Atlantic salmon episodes, and there's a lot of overlap, although there are differences. Have you been out for Atlantic salmon? Is that on your bucket list?
Number one on the bucket list for sure. My friend of mine, Greg Heister, has the show Seasons on the Fly. And I remember watching the episode from the Restigouche, and I'm just going, I'm like, yes, please. And I think last year in the F3T, they had one of the tours, I apologize, but they had the Hook guys, Hooke.
Oh, yeah, Hooky.
Yeah, I'm like Hooky or Hook or something.
Yeah.
And they had in this one, and this guy lands this like 30-pounder, and I'm just going, oh my God.
Wow.
And just dime bright. And then they're like back at the lodge, and then the guy says, now maybe if the gods align, I'll be able to catch a bigger fish tomorrow. And I just go, F you, in the middle of the whole thing, just because I'm going, you just caught 30. And of course, the next day they go out and catch like a 45-pounder. It's like, oh my God. And it's just that kind of, that whole subculture, that whole world seems just incredible to me. And someday I hope to be able to take part in it. And I got to probably save a couple more dollars or get lucky and get the invite somewhere. But I know it can be quite expensive, but getting to be friends with some people who are, a guide every year in Iceland. And, someday I'll get over there. Someday.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. We had Fred Campbell on with Hook A in episode 617, and he talked about Quebec and fishing that, but also Iceland. Yeah. I think Iceland's become, now that the UK has been struggling, I think that Iceland is that one destination, but the East Coast of North America is pretty awesome too. So some opportunities.
Yeah. And I've seen those videos from like the Alta and places in Norway. And granted, it's like, $20,000 a week to go do that kind of stuff. But I remember seeing a guy catching, a 40, 50-pound salmon. I'm just going, oh God. So yeah, absolutely. Atlantic salmon is number one on the bucket list.
Perfect. So I want to hear about a little on Backcountry Hunters and Anglers. It seems like you've got two big, Wild Steelhead Coalition and the BHA. Talk about that. Has that been something you've been doing for a while?
Yeah. I always come from the perspective that I think sometimes that hunting and fishing can be a bit of a selfish activity, if you will. It's more of a take, if you will. And I always have felt this feeling that I need to give back. I feel very compelled it's very Pollyanna, but I figure you got to do something to give back. And so for years, I wrote this blog called Mills Fly. And, I got connected to a lot of amazing people throughout the industry. And I remember Dave McCoy over at Emerald Water Anglers, he did a showing of a Confluence film, and it was a fundraiser for the Wild Steelhead Coalition. And they were over in Seattle, and I knew those guys. So I'm like, well, hell, I can do that. I know how to run promotions and stuff. And we showed the film, had a great event, raised a couple $1,000s, and it was great. And then I did it again the next year, and they were like, hey, you want to be on the board? And I was like, that was 2013. And I was like, all right, sure. So, it's been about 10 years on the Wild Steelhead Coalition, and that kind of launched my path and down the, I hate the term, my journey, which is the most overused thing in the world. But that's how I started, is really got into the conservation world, was, being on the board for the Wild Steelhead Coalition and doing things like helping a consortium of groups help purchase land on the lower Grand Ronde River and give it back to the state because a landowner wanted to get rid of 8 acres right along the Grand Ronde, and just learning how to institute projects like that and make real impact and do a lot of great things for the steelhead world. Stand up for to be the Lorax, if you will, for the for fish. And met a lot of incredible people, and I owe a lot to that group. As a matter of fact, we have a board meeting tonight, but I spent my professional career. I worked for radio stations and sold advertising and digital advertising, and I was like, eventually kind of feeling a little bit burnt out in that arena. And so what I knew I wanted to try to get into conservation work, and nobody ever gets into nonprofit work to make a ton of money. But I had started volunteering for Backcountry Hunters and Anglers in 2015. And just as a backup, we like to say we're the voice for the wild public lands, waters, and wildlife of North America. We've got, roughly 30,000 folks as members across the country, 49 state chapters, 26 college clubs, and about 40 to 50 military installations through our Armed Forces Initiative. And I remember going into my first event, which was a rendezvous in Spokane, and going, oh, these are all like the people I want to be around all the time, and it's this wonderful blend of really audacious, forward-thinking folks that really recognize that there was a real threat to the public land estate of the United States. We have about 642 million acres of federally managed public lands, not to mention a couple hundred other million administered by the states. And we just have this rare place where we can float down the majority of rivers in this country, get into lakes, park your truck and go run around in different places to your heart's content. Whereas nobody else has this outside of Canada in the United States. Have the ability to go recreate and do what you want to do, whether it's hunt, fish, camp, bike on this incredible place. I think about all the rivers I've flown down and coming through access points that are provided by public access. And, whether it's hunting or fishing, you got to have the ability to get to the place where you want to do what you want to do. And if you don't have that, you become locked out. And really felt this line in the sand and felt really compelled. And the people that I worked with and volunteered with are just some of the most incredible people out there. I remember I went back to Washington, D.C. on a lobbying trip for the Land and Water Conservation Fund in late 2015. And it like cauterized it right then and there that I needed to go to work for this group. They do incredible work. And so, just kept volunteering and showing up when I could and doing what I could. And then my lovely wife went back to work, went back into the pharmaceutical rep range. And so I got a sugar mama, which allowed me to kind of step away from the advertising world. And I was hired on about 3.5 years ago, BHA, and now I handle all of our corporate partnerships. So, everybody from a Benchmade Knives to Mystery Ranch to Sims to NRS and up and down in between. So it is an absolute dream job that I get to do that. But it's like, I just feel that, we as hunters and anglers, that we owe a debt to the land. We owe a debt to the North American model of conservation. We owe a debt to everything that has come before us to be able to give us the opportunities that we have. And so that's why I just feel so compelled about what I do and who I work for and the work that we do.
Amazing. Yeah, it's great to hear. Sometimes I don't ever take it for granted now because I have 2 little kids too, and always thinking about, you're out hunting. We got a hunting trip coming up around the corner, and
nice.
There's a lot of public land that we hunt on, and there's private lands adjacent.
Sure.
But it's pretty awesome to be able to go out there. And we were in Wisconsin fishing a lot of private property, but their land use laws allowed public access to all streams. So do you guys dig into that? I know that issue has popped up a lot, like access. Like Montana has access, right?
Yeah, so I'm not as 100% locked in all the nuance of policy from state to state, but one of the biggest issues in the United States is we have this giant web of crap with our stream access laws across the country. And so, whereas in the state of Washington or Idaho or Montana, we live in the gold standard, right? Where if it's within the high water mark and you're going through a legally accessed, access point or whatever it may be, have at it. You know what I mean? And, you can go wherever you want, but then you have places like Colorado where It is an absolute quagmire. You've got Utah, with its real bad issues with the Utah stream access fight that has been there. There's been some really good hope out of New Mexico where there was codified. The access was codified by the government of New Mexico last year, I believe it was. But you have this issue down, I believe it's on the Animas. I hope I'm saying that river correctly. In Colorado, where a gentleman named Roger Hill was basically harassed continually to get off the river through and it was a total BS, and they're trying to challenge it right now. But it's from state to state, it just blows my mind. When I started to investigate this, there's other places you can't do this. State of Colorado, you can't even drop an anchor in the stream because the owners own to the middle of the stream on the stream bed. It's to me that it seems like just even a safety issue if you have to stop your boat or whatever. I mean, it's just crazy to me. But also, we get into, the thing that can also be a pretty challenging thing for BHA, but also can be part of our strength is we're involved in a lot of stuff. We've got some great members on the East Coast that are really standing up for shoreline access, whether that's in Rhode Island, where that got codified into law because people are really trying to always restrict people from getting on the seaboard and get on the streams. We also have people like Michael Woods and Chris Borgatti, who are working on the striped bass management plan on the East Coast, because, that's their steelhead, if you will. I mean, that's their, pinnacle species out there. And, I'm just thinking of just different examples as I go through mine of even down in Texas where, there's a landowner and developer that's basically trying to lock people out from this lake and traditional hunting for ducks on this specific lake. And so it's public access and the opportunity to go and do what we want based on federally managed public lands or state managed public lands is always under threat. And so, I mean, it's an issue coming out of, Utah right now where they're trying to sue the federal government over ownership of specific lands. It's crazy. And the thing is that states oftentimes cannot administer public lands to the level that they need to. Fire budgets, fire suppression will bankrupt states. And so oftentimes when stuff gets transferred into state ownership, they cannot administer it and therefore becomes sold oftentimes. And so when you have state ownership, most states cannot operate land at a loss. And so only the federal government can. And it's nuanced all over the place, but it feels like we're fighting a good fight, and it feels good to be on the right side of history.
Yeah. It sounds like, I mean, there's a lot of public lands out there, federal, state, but it sounds like what you're saying is the federal government is better at managing these public lands. Is that the better thing?
Whether it's better or not, it's just that we can afford them.
Yeah. Right.
So much. I mean, the astronomical costs associated with fire and other things that do associate with that. It's just, we have the ability to afford them and I'm not getting into a states' rights or a federal rights issue or anything like that, but it's like a lot of states' constitutions don't have the ability to continually to administer lands at a loss. And so that's where a lot of land disposal happens. And most of the time that goes to people who's got the biggest checkbook or, extractive resource type stuff. And, I'm not against mining. I'm not against logging. I'm not against any of that stuff. But, God's not making any more trout streams or mountain meadows. And that's what I'll tell you.
No, that's right. Back, BHA, I always think at first as a hunting, right? Hunting lands. But is there an equal amount of angler access, or is it heavily weighted towards the hunting?
I think it's probably a little more hunting, but at the same time, hunting seasons are very finite. In the state of Washington, we have very small big game seasons, depending on your method of take. And fishing, people ask me when's fishing season? I'm like, that's kind of an anecdotal question to me, because you can fish all year long. And I think, we have a lot of passionate anglers. We have a lot of passionate men and women that are out there, doing stream cleanups and awesome things that are out there to benefit. And so, yeah, it tends to be a little more hunting focused, but I'm probably 70% fishing, 30% hunting in my life. And so I hope I'm answering the question right. But yeah, it definitely is one of those things where my focus tends to be more on swimming things than walking things. But I'm pretty fired up for the nexus of my favorite portion of the year when pheasant hunting opens up, and I can do that around Eastern Washington with my dog and my friends and my dad, and and then if I didn't have obligations, go to the next day, and or I've done it in the past where we've hunted in the morning and fished in the afternoon, or vice versa, and it's pretty awesome.
The cast and blast, the old cast and blast.
Yeah, although chuckers can go to hell. That's all I'll tell you.
Right. Is that, I had somebody on a while back, we were talking about, I can't remember what he called it, but I think we were talking about the Deschutes, but he called it where you got a deer, a steelhead, and I think a chucker in the same day.
Yeah.
But is that something, are you thinking about that, like gamifying stuff, or do you just go out there and kind of have a good time?
I get so stuck into wanting to swing a fish, and then I look at the rock wall that I have to climb up to go and to get after chucker, and I just go, pretty comfy in this river right now, even though it's really hard to wade, but I'm like, yeah, I have too many stories when I was a young, fat, early teenage years and running around on the shale slide canyons around the Snake and the Grand Ronde and going, I don't know if this is fun right now. I don't know if I'm having a great time, but there's a reason why they're called the devil birds. But yeah, I just think that this upcoming time we have right now is just like, people are like, I love summer. I'm like, man, I really love the fall and winter. That's my jam. But we get a chance to, I'm just feel so fortunate to be able to fish for steelhead from like August to like January over here, and then try to pipe in a 1 or 2 winter trips a year with my friends. Haven't had some pretty good success over with with my friends in the Nehalem area or, the North Coast streams they're pretty special to me as well.
Yeah. You got the winter, the other side, right? The coastal. Do you find summers easier or harder than winter steelhead fishing?
I think summers are easier. They're a little more trouty. I think the steelhead are fish of 1,000 casts, but so much of it is just meeting them where they can see your stuff and being able to present it properly. I don't think necessarily that winter steelhead bite less or summer. There's always going to be a lot more summer steelhead. It's an issue of numbers, and winter fish are not going to come in the waves that summer steelhead do, just out of total numbers. Winters are definitely harder to get on a swim fly. That's for sure. Whereas a summer fish, you can go pull off the top of the water column on a skater. I know there's some crafty individuals like Adrian Cortez, and, they're fishing dry flies in the winter, and that's a level of pain I've yet to be able to subject myself to, but I know it does happen. But I came upon this poorly askewed analogy a while back of it. I was talking to somebody about elk hunting and talking to them about how steelhead fishing is kind of my elk hunting in some respects, how I'm pretty laser focused on it. And I was like, well, like you can, if you're a good, skilled rifleman or woman out there, and you can legitimately take a bull elk or a cow elk at 500 yards with a high-powered rifle and a good scope and a good rest. I was like, that's kind of like bait. You know what I mean? Like,
right.
It's still very skillful, but you're it's easier to get it's a little easier with bait than it is on a swung fly. And then you work down the progression. Maybe you got to be like 100 yards or 150 yards away with a muzzleloader. I was like, that's kind of like your spinners or your spoons. And I was like, then, you've got your compound bow, and get within 50 yards maybe or whatever. And again, this is just kind of an off the cuff analogy, but like, then you've got like, that's kind of like your nymphing, right? And then there's the guy, the idiot running around with his stick bow, trying to do it the hardest way possible and get within 15 yards or 10 yards, and I go, that's me being an idiot trying to fish dry flies or trying to fish, skated muddlers or anything on the top inch of the water column. But God, when it comes together, it is so incredible. So incredible. Have I caught fish with bait before? Is it awesome? Yes, it is. It's cool. But to me, the pinnacle is when you can get that fish to come up and take it off the top. It just lights me up to no end.
That's amazing. I know your dad had a big influence on you. Is he still out there going strong fishing and all that?
Oh yeah. Old Man River, as we like to call him, is still kicking ass in any way he can. We just did a trip. He turned 84 mid-September and was able to take him, my father-in-law Eric, and my older son we went and fished with gear on the Hanford Reach.
Oh wow!
And caught a couple of big king salmon. That I was more proud that my son was able to catch about a 15-pounder. That was pretty awesome. Normally, my dad is and I attached at the hip, but he's having some ankle problems right now, so we're finding different ways to get him involved. And whether it's get on the raft and swing flies through the raft, or when we go bird hunting, he's the blocker. And put him in spots for success. So the will is always there. That is for sure. It's just he's had the ankle replacement in about a month, and so it's kind of slowed him down. He's all pissed off. And I was like, oh, you'll be ready by turkey season, Dad. You'll be ready to go. So
does he cast the spey rod?
We kind of learned together. It really kind of lit us up about the same time, and kind of we're at each other's side as we try to kind of the blind leading the blind, learning our way to well, what's this line do? Why do we do this? How does this happen? And then we were just taken in by this community of folks that I met through, one person begets another person begets another person. And we all jokingly referred to it. It came off of WashingtonFlyFishing.com back when that was a big thing. But a lot of people were connected through that. And I'm just so grateful to have made these connections over the years of, the people that have kind of took me under the wing and showed me a way. And like Mike, who's one of my Steely Mike, I'm sure you've heard his name a few times. And Mike, I remember I got this in 2000. I got this spey rod, and I didn't know what the piss I was doing, but I was going to drive down to the mouth of Deschutes and figure it out. And I'm like, hey, where would you camp? I'm not trying to get any secret spots or anything like that. And he's like, why don't you just get in the drift boat with us? And I'm just like, oh, cool. And these people just wrapped your arms around you, and we just clicked. And then a couple of years later, I remember we were standing in the turkey run of the Grand Ronde as the light came through, and he's like, hey, you coming to my wedding next year? And I'm like, yeah, if you're inviting me. He goes, no, you're in the wedding. And I was just like, almost brought to tears, because It was just like, this web of friendship and connectivity. And there's 50 to 60 people that I can call on right now, and I know they'll call me back immediately, or we'll talk. And it's built this community of people that are out there, and it's pretty awesome.
Trout Routes is the most comprehensive mapping app for trout anglers. With over 50,000 trout streams, 350,000 access points, public land maps, and more, Trout Routes is the #1 resource for navigating, researching, and exploring trout streams, and it deserves a place in every angler's toolkit. I was in New York fishing recently. My first time in New York fishing, I had the Trout Routes app, and I was able to check out and access public access points through the maze of private property on the rivers we were fishing. And after I got into the stream and was fishing down through a run, I wasn't quite sure. I saw a house down below. I wasn't quite sure where the property lines ended, but given that I had Trout Routes, I was confident where I was fishing, and I was able to assure that I wasn't trespassing. You will be fully prepared with offline maps. You can get driving directions to points of interest, drop pins, add your notes in the app, all while keeping all of your data private to your account only. You can visit troutroutes.com right now to learn more and download the Trout Routes app for free in the App Store today. That's Trout Routes, TROUTROUTES. Start exploring today.
Yeah, the spey, I think that was about the same time I started, 2009. Do you feel like, now that it's been a number of years, do you feel like you're top of your game, or you still got lots of room for improvement?
Oh, it's an ever improving scenario. It's an always, how do you make yourself a little bit better, right? Like, I was, thankfully, I was graced with being continually borrowing a Berkheimer 15-footer and learning how to cast, your longer lines. It's got a lot of room in that. And a lot of, you watch it, guys like, and I mentioned again, like Brian Chou, and watching him cast and watching the technical proficiency of what he does, or other people like him, or Matt Clara, or, Calvin Fuller, or, other people that are out there that are like, you watch and you go, they're machines, like, and they're just graceful machines. Are they able to replicate what they do? Or it's how they deal with wind, or how they deal with challenging currents, or how they can dissect a run and go, okay, the fish is going to be there, there, and there. And then there's I got people out there that, I watch with amazement. There's a gentleman named Ryan Bailey, who was one of my best friends. And I kind of started him, got him going, and, was fishing for two-handers. And he is just springboarded past all this. Matter of fact, we have a text message thread amongst the friends, and he's on it. It's called Bailey Catches Too Much. Because he's, there's certain people out there that are just absolutely steelhead magnets.
Yeah.
And my dad's one of them. And my buddy Ryan's one of them. And you watch what they do, and you go try to dissect with you, and you're thinking, God, I'm doing the same thing. But the thing is, they're not. And you're not, because they're doing something. And I think a lot of it has to do with line management and how you end up presenting the fly. he turns the fly over perfectly every time. I do not. And I think it shows. Whereas, he may have caught 7 or 8 steelhead so far on the Clearwater this year. I've caught 1. And so, it's trying to learn from these people, also keeping an eye to history on things that, they love, whether it's learning how to transition back and forth between a Skagit head to a mid-belly to a delta to whatever, and being a complete angler. And also, I love spay fishing, but, one of my greatest mentors in conservation, a guy named Rich Sims, who was one of the founding members of the Wild Steelhead Coalition, we call him the MSH, the militant single-hander, because he sticks with his single-hander, and there's thousands upon thousands of steelhead that have been caught on single-hand 9-foot 8-weights that we forget that the majority of fish are caught, within 50 feet of the bank.
Yeah, no, I hear you. That's kind of my story, too. I picked up 2009 the spay because I was heading up the Skeena for the first time, and I knew it would be helpful to have it, and it was. But before then, it had been all single hand. My dad never cast a spay rod. We were like anti-spay, but yeah, we it's a lot easier though with the spay. I think that's what's cool about it.
Oh, it's so much fun. It's like I tell people, like, why do you like it? I go, because it's kind of like if you golf, and I don't golf much anymore, but like when you hit a driver really true and it just goes. And the same thing he said, when you snap a good cast and everything hits and it barely clicks at the end and it turns over perfectly, and it's like, that's awesome.
That is good stuff. So I haven't fished Clearwater. I'm hopeful that I'm going to get out there soon, but Clearwater versus Deschutes, are there more similarities or more differences?
I've only spent maybe about 10 days on the Deschutes. I've spent entirely too much time on the Clearwater, but I love it. I love to hate it and hate it to love, all the bit of it. It's like, she does not give up her secrets very well. Clearwater is so much bigger in terms of the width of that river and your ability to, that's why it's super fun. You can go out there, you have lots of great casting room and stuff like that. You can rock your 14 to 16 foot rod. What I know about the Deschutes is, I think there's some sun orientation issues during the day, and that's why you switch to tips a lot more. With Clearwater, I'm running, and granted, I probably should switch to tips sometimes, but I'm pretty obstinate in the fact that I want to get them how I want to get them. But you can fish a dry line all the way through December and into January if you want to.
Like all day long, middle of the day?
Oh, yeah. And, even when the water gets a little bit colder, because those fish are just, there's something to do with those fish and their genetics. They are apt to rise through the water column. And they still do that on the Deschutes for sure, but you don't have to depend on weight to get your fish to move as much on the Clearwater. The fish I have caught on the Deschutes, incredible fish. The thing is, with the Clearwater, you do have the chance at your B runs that will just absolutely smoke you. And so, every river's got its little secrets. And I just think the Deschutes is a little more manageable from a size perspective. They both share the things with the Grand Ronde and the Snake, is that I fall in them all the time because I'm clumsy. So that's great. But, those basalt-oriented rivers, I think the Deschutes and the Grand Rondes share more similarities, even though the Grand Ronde is a half size smaller than the Deschutes, for sure. But like the Clearwater, you can fish it at 14,000 CFS and you can fish it at 3,000 CFS. It's widely variable because it's dam controlled. I mean, to some extent, also like it happens on the Deschutes, but right now the Clearwater is running at about 3,000 CFS. And so there's a whole host of places I'll fish at that level. And then, what's crazy is when it's running as a high water river, there's a whole host of places I can go at 13,000. And so knowing that it operates as almost as two different rivers, depending on the flow, because they'll drop it like pretty precipitously very fast. And so knowing where to go and stuff like that. But like the Clearwater is so stingy from time to time. And then you have other people that doesn't have any problem with it. But, I tell you what, if you wanted to go catch them, you can go book, your gear boats. They get them. They really get them on that river.
Oh, so are there lots of gear fishermen on the Clearwater?
Sure. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, just as much as the Snake. I mean, we run into it on the Snake quite a bit too. And most people are very cordial. I try to, I don't own the river and neither do they. And we just share it together.
Yeah, that's right. If somebody was fishing the Clearwater, struggling to get their first steelhead, what would be a few tips you'd give them?
Go see Poppy up at Peck. Go see Poppy and Dale and crew up at the Red Shed. A lot of times they may give you a little tip here and there, but just the most incredible people run that fly shop. I jokingly refer to Poppy as the oracle of steelhead. And so it's just a good reset to go up there and do that. But also the thing that I tell people on the bigger rivers is you have to not pay attention to the other half of the river. You just have to cut it in half. And like on the snake, you have to cut it almost like into thirds and throw 2/3 of it away, because you're just not gonna effectively fish to that stuff. And then you learn how to break down the river a little bit better, because you can see where the bucket's going to be. You can see where it's, the fish are going to travel, where, that kind of stuff. And the tip that I was given, and I give back to people who are asking, is that, fish are inherently lazy. And, why would a fish stop there? Why is a fish going to, it's going to expend the least amount of energy as possible once it's ascended a rapid or a cataract or something out there? Find that water that they're chilling in and meet them there.
Exactly. Love that. Breaking down the river is a good tip. What is on the Clearwater? So lots of guys, are there more guys using the big stuff, longer rods, or is there a lot of the compact stuff too?
It depends on the time of the year, right? You're definitely going to see it's that river is made for a 60-foot line and a 15-foot rod. Like, there is nothing more joyful to me than casting away with my 15-footer and a 55 to 60-foot head and, on a dry line, and maybe going to an intermediate poly. But that river it can be very trouty at times. And then, depending on I fished last year, day after Christmas, and, definitely in that more orientation in me of running a Skagit compact with, some T11s and stuff like that. And, doing the low and slow game a little bit. And so, but I have friends that fish dry line all year. And so it's just a matter of where your confidence lies. I have yet to get a dry line fish in December, like my buddy Ryan. So I switched to things that I'm a little bit better at and I have a little more confidence in. And the same thing can be said for, I watched Zach Williams with my buddy take a fish off the top 6 inches of the water column on the snake when the water was 38 degrees. So it's like, just because the playbook automatically says this, there is absolutely outliers that get it done the way they want to get it done.
Right. That's awesome. So it sounds like, you have a good mixture of gear, long rods, short rods. What about your reels? What are you using for steelhead reel?
I absolutely adore old reels. I think they're the coolest thing in the world, or reels that are based upon that. Like, a lot of times I was graced with and given a Loop Classic, a 10-11 or whatever the weight is specifically on that. But my first really good Hardy was a Hardy St. John, and and I've caught a lot of fish on that. And it sounds like my dad calls it my coffee grinder, and he goes, "Everybody knows you got a fish." And I go, "That's the point, man. You want to have, if you don't catch a ton of them, at least you get out there and having a good time with it." So right. Yeah, I absolutely adore the history of those reels that are so simplistic and so like mechanically sound that I fish. Like, I've got the St. John that I fish a lot on my 13-foot rod is probably from the 30s. I've got one from the 1940s. I've got a Marquis that I think, or Marquis, or I don't even say it right, but I think it's from the 60s or early 70s. I think it's really cool that you can do that, because do I have reels that could stop a truck? Sure. But I think there is a little more fun with your classic loud ass reels. I just think they're so cool.
There's something about that. When you're on the Clearwater, are there any runs where you're fishing on one side and there's people on the other side where you're kind of watching them?
Absolutely. The river's so big in so many places. You can't, unless you get way further up in the system, but like, there are certain, you see it all the time where you'll fish, one side of the river, and you're fishing, you see somebody fishing the other side. There's many different places like that for sure.
That's cool. Yeah. I find myself on the Deschutes sometimes doing the quiet stuff because there are some busy areas, and it's almost like I'm trying to land the fish without them even knowing I hooked a fish.
Oh, sure. Sure. Well, like, one of the guys that goes to the Clearwater is Klaus Fleemore from.
Oh yeah. Yeah. Klaus. Sure.
Yeah. Klaus, he dumps his reel in the water. Of course.
That's a good trick.
Because he's pretty secretive about it. But there's also quite a bit of joy of finding a new run and being kind of quiet about it and not really telling everybody about it. And I'm always kind of hunting and looking, because you have your standard. Let's say you have 15 runs that you fish pretty religiously on one river. I think it's the best when you think you've discovered something new. Well, of course, someone has already fished it before you, but new to you is pretty cool. And when it produces, you feel like you've unlocked a pretty solid mystery. And I just think that's the best.
Yeah. Have you fished with some pretty good spey casters, and what is that like when you're not the best fly caster of the group?
I love that. I'm ready to say that I'm very middle of the road. I can do some things, but we have a steelhead camp on the Grand Ronde every year, and the people that come in there are just incredible sticks. And the people that I've mentioned before, or like another gentleman named Rick Matney, or like Calvin Fuller from Fly Project, or Steely. Watching Mike and Brian Chou dissect runs is just, they're surgical. It's pretty incredible. And I always joke that like Mike and I will get up, and it's always traditional during camp to run down the turkey run. And he knows every rock on that place. And like last year I followed him down, and he swung 3 fish before I touched one. And he kept going, "Do you want to get in front of me?" And I go, "No, I want to sit and watch the master of work, awesome, man." And, it's like, if you think you're the best, then you're obviously the worst, because if you're not paying attention to other people and what they do and how they do it and picking up little things from people, I think you're missing the point.
Yeah, that's it. One of my favorite quotes is "You are the average of the 5 people you spend most of your time around," So if you're around those, I'm sure you're a much better caster, right? Because of those people, Brian. And we've had some of those had Brian on, and Tom Larimer. You've mentioned a number of people that are just great anglers and great fly casters, right?
Here's the funny thing about Chou is that if you watch him in his rod reviews in a lot of the magazines that he writes for, 90% of the pictures will be left-handed.
Oh, wow.
And that's just a joke between all of us buddies, because he's right-handed. But he'll do all his casts in the magazine left-handed. Which you're just like, I hate you so much. Of course, in the ability to learn little things, like one of the greatest gifts he gave me in terms of tips was like learning how to drift your hands when you're running longer lines, right? So it's like, where you can be pretty finite and pretty locked in certain, windows of movement when you're casting like a Skagit hitter or Rage or, a Scout or something like that. With the longer lines, you have to drift a little bit. And he's like, now, and the thing, I can always hear Brian's voice going drift, and meaning my hands go above my ears a little bit more, and it allows that D-loop to develop and kind of work. Or just, when my casting goes to or it's people that have always reminded me, go, "Hey, you're pushing the top hand way too much," and so much of it becomes, "How are you pulling on your bottom hand?" And I'll just sit there and tell myself bottom hand from the instruction I've got from other people, and invariably the cast comes back, because you get yourself into bad habits of trying to hammer that top hand, and nothing works in that way.
Right. Yeah. So is that it? So with the longer the rod, you kind of tend to bring your arms higher up. You need that to help the D.
Or allowing that D loop to actually develop, and knowing that your timing one, everybody's a little bit different, right? And so, but what I found works for me is that as I let that D loop develop, my hands drift above my ear a little bit more. Things open up, the D loop opens up, and you can actually make a longer. I remember the first time I tried a 60-foot head or a 55-foot head, I'm like, which is not altogether that long, considering a lot of people still fish those 85, 90 footers. Mm-hmm. But like, I found that's what works for me, and then we kind of dialed it in, and it's the minutia of stuff like that Brian would teach me, like, okay, well, what if we cut this line back and take 10 grains off of it? What's that going to do? And you're like, you're learning how to ask the question of yourself, how can I do this better? And invariably, there's always another way to make it a little better. So whether that's fly tying, what lines you're using, or how you're presenting the fly.
Yeah, that's awesome. What's the we haven't talked a ton about fly tying, and we're going to take it out of here in a bit, but talk about that. Do you spend a lot of time tying flies? Is it mostly steelhead? What's that look like?
I would say I just am enamored with the construction of steelhead flies. I think it's pretty awesome. I think that's my favorite thing to tie. Usually I get up around 5:30 every day, go walk the dog, and get back in about an hour. I usually have about 45 minutes to an hour before the minions wake up and start their day. So that's where I've got an office here that half of it's for my day job, and the other half is fly tying. And my wife obliges my ability to add more materials to a smaller space and not look like I'm too much of a hoarder. Thankfully, she's pretty good at helping me organize that stuff. But I think like anything, it's just how much time are you spending with the materials and learning how to manipulate them or taking a little bit from a lot of different people's playbooks and developing your own style. So, I definitely have my own style. But it leans heavily on what I've been taught from other people. And, picking up books like Dryline Steelhead from Bill McMillan, or, the original Steelhead Trout book from Trey Combs or Jack Hogan, or, those guys who came, kind of really moved things along from, if you look at the old book from, the grease line method from Jock Scott and how that was essentially lost for a period of time until, Bill and his cohort really kind of brought it back and made it in vogue. And so tying wise, I'll tie steelhead stuff all year long. I have an affinity for warm water fish like smallmouth bass, and other things that you don't have to be too cutesy with. I jokingly say I suck at dry flies, mainly because I just don't really enjoy tying them unless they're, have foam and other fun stuff for cutthroat.
So you're not the Catskills. You're not tying a lot of Catskills style.
No. Can I? Yes. Begrudgingly, will I from time to time. I also enjoy the streamers. I got a chance to go to the East Coast last year with one of my coworkers and fish for stripers, and learning how to tie flat wings is pretty awesome. Or being able to, hey, somebody's going somewhere like, we got to go to Golden Dorado fishing 2 years ago or 3 years ago, and, getting some pictures and whipping them up here, 3,000, 5,000 miles away and making them work when you get down there. It's pretty rewarding. I pretty much love that.
That's sweet. Yeah, this is great. Well, let's start to take it out here. We've got a segment. It's our conservation shout out segment. And the cool thing is that we've already talked about a lot of this today, but today it's presented by Anglers Coffee, one of our partners, and they're doing awesome stuff. And I think they worked with Wild Steelhead Coalition. Does that ring a bell at all?
Yeah, I believe they have in the past. Yes.
Yeah. So we got a good connection here. Anglers has great coffee, but they also do a lot of stuff for conservation, and Joe is doing a good job there. I want to take it out of here. First off, the Wild Steelhead Coalition, we haven't talked a ton about that, but how do you spend your time there? Is that mostly as a board member? Maybe give us a little heads up there.
So Wild Steelhead, started around the year 2000, 2001. It is a hell of an organization that we punch above our weight because 95% of what we do is volunteer-led. We have one small contractor that helps us out who is worth his weight in gold, but, it is a volunteer-run organization that tries to be the voice for wild steelhead, and mostly focused in Washington, but with influence and help in, from Alaska to California. It's just a great group of people, guys and gals, who are very, very passionate about steelhead conservation. And so, doing things like sticking up for stuff in places that need, conservation, whether it's things that are going on in places like the Skagit, or helping fundraise for stuff and doing this public land edition on the Grand Ronde, or it's, there recently, I'll have to send it to you, we did a great big article. Linda Mapes from the Seattle Times just did a big article about steelhead, which we, worked with. Or there's just so many different things that we've done over the years. I kind of struggling to remind myself of all the different things that we've done. But, for a little organization that is mostly volunteers and run on a very, very shoestring budget, we get a lot done.
Yeah. Where could they find more information on what Wild Steelhead Coalition has done?
The website is wildsteelheadcoalition.org.
Good. And then BHA, what's the website there?
So here's the funny thing. It's backcountryhunters.org. So because it was originally licensed as Backcountry Hunters.
Awesome. And we'll mention anglerscoffee.com just to round it out. What's your drink? 5:30 in the morning, 6 in the morning. Are you drinking? We're drinking Anglers. What are you drinking? Is it coffee? Is it tea?
Absolutely. I'm a strong cup of espresso roast. Put it into the French press and get that rocket fuel going for the day. Absolutely. I could drink a pot of that before I go to bed, go to sleep. But if I don't get that going before it's dark 30 and I'm running out to the river, and I got to have that coffee.
Yeah, me too. Yeah, coffee is a good, and I'm the same way. I could drink it in the evenings and still go to sleep. I'm not sure what.
Isn't that weird?
It is kind of good though. You mentioned, I think it was on another podcast about, it was maybe a few years ago, about steelhead out-migrating and how they swim.
Yeah. So from what I understand, and again, not a scientist, just remembering things that I've been taught and things, that smolt down migrate backwards. So they are looking upriver, going downriver.
Right. Just basically letting the water take them down.
Correct. And that's, one of the issues that we have with the lower Snake River dams is that it increases their energy output to have, because they were just back in the day, they're just riding the spring freshet out to the ocean.
So now they actually have to turn around if they don't, right? If they don't turn around, they're getting trouble in the pool, right? The pools.
Right. So, there's a lot of issue with how they pass dams. I mean, we lose 4 to 6% of the smolt at each lower Snake River dam. So, when you're passing 4 additional and it's almost 20% of the run is whacked off the top because they can't, yes, you only lose 4%, but you lose 4% at every dam at a minimum. So yeah, I just think that's one of the most interesting things that I heard. I tell that to people and they're like, what?
That is pretty cool. That's one of those fun facts.
Yeah. They down migrate backwards effectively through that. Yeah. And I'm pretty sure winters will do the same, but I don't know the absolute thought of that, because, they can, they're a little more apt to have multiple spawning runs. So winter fish.
You mentioned the dams. So Snake River dams, the 4 dams, this has been, years now people have been talking about. Do you know the current status of that and where things are at?
Just it's a continual, education process. It's a continual coalition building. It's our belief that nobody should be left to hold the bag. You know what I mean? Everybody should be. I think there's a way to keep everybody whole, keep the farmers whole, keep the shipper, the people in the shipping community, the irrigators and everything like that. Really the straw that breaks the camel's back in that run are the lower 4 Snake River dams. And they were built for barge traffic and to make Lewiston and Clarkston the world's largest inland seaport. And a lot of the majority has left the river in terms of the export products going out downriver. And, I don't think a farmer really cares which way his grain gets to market or her grain gets to the market. It's just a matter of, getting there an economically feasible way. And it's going to be a continual fight, but the empirical evidence continues to stack up, whether it's the case studies of places like the Elwha, the white salmon, on the East Coast, the Kennebec, the Penobscot, and now with the Klamath.
Right. The dams down there.
Yeah. So, news coming out yesterday that through sonar that they're seeing salmon passing above the dam sites for the first time in 100 years within like a month of removal. So it's like, sometimes if we just get the frick out of the way of nature and let her do her thing, it's pretty remarkable what Mother Nature can do.
Yeah, it is. I think we're similar age. Do you think in our lifetime, we're going to see those dams removed?
I do. It's the only way I can function. It's the only way I can think my way through it, right? Because, so much of what it is, the amount of money we spend as ratepayers and taxpayers to prop up that system, to continually try to make what I believe is a broken system on the lower 4 Snake dams. It's $16 to $24 billion by most estimates in the last couple of decades. And dams have a finite life window, and it's not like they're a mountain. I think we have to remind ourselves that not everything was perfect the way it was. I mean, in terms of what we did to put these dams in, it's a miracle, I believe, that these fish are still there to cross 8 dams, 500 miles plus in from the ocean and still do the things that we get to do with them. It blows my mind. And I think we owe a debt to the tribes. I think we owe a debt to the environment. I think we owe a debt to the land. I think it just makes the most sense to me. And it's supposed, because the other part of this is I hold a lot of relationships dear with farmers in the Palouse region, and I do not want to see them affected negatively as well. And I think there's a way that, everybody can come together and do this and really have our cake and eat it too.
Yep. Perfect. Well, I got a couple of random ones that we chatted about here, and then we'll take it out. So you mentioned radio. I'm interested in that. Take us back there. What was your career in radio about? What was that like?
I sold the spots and dots, man. It was my first job after college. I began at Clear Channel, which became iHeart.
Oh, wow.
I was at that cluster in Spokane for 17 plus years. It built a wonderful career and clients, great people. The medium still works great. Shifted a lot of my emphasis towards digital as I got going later on. But, it had a great run there, and just I sold. I guess my voice was on a couple commercials here and there when they needed a random voice, but for the most part, I was I was out doing my Glengarry, Glen Ross selling things,
Right. So you're basically selling ad spots for brands.
Correct. So writing commercials, running ad campaigns, working with multiple, everything. The thing about local media reps is you are the creative director, you are the salesperson, you are the collections agent. You really learn how to be a full-fledged marketing firm by yourself.
Right. That's so cool. And iHeart really had a podcast. I think they're still in the podcast space. I think Spotify and Apple Podcasts are much, bigger. But yeah, they're still out there, right? But did you have a podcast?
Actually, the biggest purveyor of podcasts is iHeart.
It is?
Yeah.
There you go.
Because you think about it, they have the network. I mean, they have 1,200 radio stations across the country in like 85 markets. They're an absolute monster. It's just so big. And then, you should put your podcast. I mean, it's an open-ended source, so you could put your podcast on the iHeart network, so people can access it anywhere you want.
Yeah, it is, and that's a good thing. This podcast is pretty much everywhere. It gets redistributed everywhere. We did a podcast with Hal Herring in episode 549.
He's the man.
Yeah, you know Hal a little bit. He's such a unique guy. Do you know him a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, he hosts the BHA podcast and Blast. I think there isn't a more interesting man in conservation that has more connectivity, more relationships, and the most unique guests in the conservation community than Hal. He can talk well about the most obscure stuff and the most high-level stuff, and just incredible. And he did a movie with Patagonia a while back, talking about public land removal and different things. And we are so lucky to have him.
Yeah. Is there one episode I know you listen to a little bit of the podcasts out there. Is there one of BHA that you think would be awesome to listen to? Or is there another podcast show you love that you'd recommend?
Well, I think, that first thing that like you just said is in terms of overall podcasts, I think BHA Podcast and Blast with Hal Herring is just incredible. And its breadth and depth is amazing. I really enjoy with what Richard Harrington is doing with his podcast. I think I forget the name of it all of a sudden, but
it's the River Rambler.
Yes. I absolutely adore that one. And Cal's Week in Review for Meat Eater is fantastic.
Oh, yeah.
So that's a great one because it's a lot more randomness, and I'm a bit of a sucker for the Meat Eater trivia podcast, but that's just me being a competitive person. But man, there's just so many great things out there right now that are happening in the media landscape. I think it's pretty incredible.
It is. Do you see it now when you look at your media? I mean, you're still in it, right? But
yeah,
when you look back at your iHeart days, does it seem like a distant memory, or do you still kind of in touch with all that?
Oh, I think the random, like the wild and crazy randomness that happens when you're just selling advertising to local businesses and stuff. I think that is the best thing it ever taught me, was the ability to try new things and learn to fail fast and be a person who takes risks in terms of how you promote things, not in a bad way, but like trying crazy. Like we do this thing with BHA called the Public Lands Yard Sale. And that was because of the radio promotions guy just never turns off in me. And I was like, and then what we end up doing is our partners donate like their end of runs, their seconds, their all their other stuff, and that is that normally would be outside the normal sales window, and it became this giant revenue producer for BHA, and thankfully because people are able to come in and buy all this donated stuff at half off of retail, and so being able to do that has just allowed me to have just this carnival barker mentality from time to time, which sometimes fails, but other times does really well.
That's cool. You mentioned earlier, did you say you're 6'8"?
I tend to be a little bit tall.
Were you that's pretty tall. That's like, were sports in your past?
I was a baseball guy. I was one of those guys that people always like, God, you must be a really good basketball player. I was like, I was all right, but I'm so glued to the ground that I was never much of a leaper. But I was a pretty decent baseball guy. I played through college, and
oh, you did?
Now I just coach a lot. Yeah.
What was your position?
I was a pitcher.
Oh, there you go. That makes sense.
Yeah.
And what college did you go to?
Started at Washington State in Pullman and finished at Whitworth University in Spokane.
Oh, in Spokane. Yeah, good. How is Spokane? It seems like a cool town where it's located on the east side of Washington. Do you enjoy, is Spokane a cool place?
It's home. I grew up here, went to high school here, finished college here, a lot of family here. And, when I first got married, and we were able to buy our first house for fairly affordable, because it was a real brain drain in this town. Like, everybody's like, I got to get out of here. You know what I mean? When everybody graduated high school or college. But, for the longest time, it was super affordable. Now I think it's all kind of caught up a little bit. But it's got its issues with some, like every major metro's got its issues with its fentanyls and its meth and things like that. We all see the effects of what's going on, the nationwide crisis in that. But I mean, for the most part, it is a very livable city. The downtown is not bad. But the outdoor activities are just freaking great. I mean, it's rare when I show people that I bird hunt with that are from out of state, and I show them like where I bird hunt on the Palouse, and they're like, wait, that looks like North Dakota. And then, you can go swing a fly in the Hoh River, and you're just like, this is incredible. And it's all within a day's drive, and it's just, the jump off point is really there. Is there much better places to trout fish? 100%, but I can still get to the Missouri in 4.5 hours, and I can be to Steelhead in 2 hours. I can be, to Cutthroat in 1.5 hours, or West Slope Cutthroat. I mean, the options are pretty there. And then, there's just great places to go see and do. And, there's better places to live and there's worse places to live.
Definitely. Well, I think we'll leave it there, Josh. I think you've got a lot of good stuff going. We'll keep in touch with you and send everybody out to @MillsFly on Instagram. Does that sound good?
It sounds fantastic.
Awesome. Well, I appreciate everything you're doing. Wild Steelhead Coalition, BHA, you're doing some great stuff for conservation, and keep up the good work. I'm looking forward to staying in touch.
Thank you for the opportunity, and I love chatting. Thank you.
All right, your call to action today. It is to check out BHA, Backcountry Hunters and Anglers, and or Wild Steelhead Coalition. Check these out, and if you're not a member yet, join these groups. If you love public lands and public waters, this is your best chance to support and assure that these lands and waterways stay public for the long term. Please follow the show. As always, if you're on Apple Podcasts, that plus button is the easiest way. I'm going to get out of here. Before I do, I just want the shop. We have launched the shop. This is our chance to connect with fellow listeners of this podcast and work on building trips together. We're going to be doing some amazing trips in the future. We got lots of good things in there. Go to wetflyswing.com/pro and you can find out more information right there. If you want to find out what we have going with our trips, you can check in with me anytime, Dave@wetflyswing.com. And I'm going to let you get out of here. I hope you are having a great afternoon. Hope you're having a fantastic evening or a fabulous morning. And I look forward to catching you on the next episode. We'll talk to you then.
Thanks for listening to the Wet Fly Swing Fly Fishing Show. For notes and links from this episode, visit wetflyswing.com.